While photographing the article Build a Fireplace Brick by Brick, I brought the video team along to capture the process. Traditionally, a Rumford is known as a tall, shallow fireplace designed to reflect heat. In this execution, mason Mike Mehaffey maintains the aesthetic, but adds depth to the firebox to meet code, and curves the back wall inward to maximize heat reflection. Although it will eventually be surrounded by 8 inches of solid masonry, the focus here will be on the layout and erection of the visible interior fire brick layer of the firebox. When we arrived on site, the guys were just beginning to mix concrete for the 12-inch thick base slab that will support the firebox. They decided to mix their own rather than hire a truck due to obstructed access and the relatively small amount needed, about 1.5 yards. While the crew methodically mixes 2 bags at a time, Mike marks out the fill line for the top of the slab. Then they fill the form, spread the concrete evenly, and set the rebar. Mehaffey likes to set the rebar after the pour because it's easy to position and keep in the top half of the slab without having it compressed to the bottom. Once positioned, he taps it beneath the surface and trowels it smooth. Then as the concrete begins to set up, he trowels notches into the surface for bonding with the next layer, creating a keyway of sorts. Then they leave the slab to set overnight. The next day brought snow and a whole lot of cold, so the guys tented in the work area in an attempt to keep the temperature above 50 degrees, the minimum working temperature of the mortar they'll be using. Once tented, it was time to lay out the base of the firebox on the slab. He begins by snapping a chalk line to mark the front face. Then he draws a center line and measures out 21 inches in each direction to mark the 42-inch opening. Then he draws a line along the back to establish the 20-inch depth. To lay bricks, Mehaffey works from the center line out, extending edges beyond the layout lines to integrate with the 8 inches of solid masonry that will complete the firebox. Because the bond is outside the combustion chamber, Mehaffey uses a standard Type S mortar to bond the fire brick to the slab. He positions the front of the first brick along the red layout line that denotes the front of the firebox, and establishes the height using a string line that represents the finished height of the base. Then he follows up with a level to get each brick set perfectly before moving on. Between bricks, he switches to fire-resistant mortar because the joints will be exposed to combustion. It has a fire rating up to 2,500 degrees. They mix the fire-resistant mortar in a 5-gallon bucket to keep batches manageable, and use a mixing paddle to completely eliminate lumps as they mix to achieve the smooth consistency of a thick paste, like thin set for setting tiles. As he fills in, Mehaffey always works from the center line out to maintain a consistent stagger between rows. He seats bricks by tapping them with the handle of his trowel or with a mason's hammer. The tapping is light, just enough to get the position exact. Then he cleans any squeeze out from between joints and moves on to the next brick. He fills in until he reaches the 20-inch depth, and then switches to standard brick to extend the base by 2 rows beyond the combustion chamber, again to support 8 inches of solid masonry that will be built up around the fire brick to complete the firebox. With the base in place, Mehaffey can move on to the walls. To mark the inside corners of the 42-inch opening, he measures out from the center line 21 inches in each direction and makes a mark. Then he measures back 20 inches, the code depth of a firebox, to establish the back wall. For the angled walls, he wants to have 2.5 bricks visible, so he dry lays them, lining the front edge with the front mark as he pivots the row until it meets the back. Then he draws a line. To transfer the angle to the other side, he simply measures from the center line to the corner and transfers that measurement in the other direction. Then he connects the 2 marks with a straight edge and draws a line. Then he's ready to lay brick.
So I'm going to start with the center brick in the back so that everything lines out off that center line. So when you're looking at it, all the lines match up.
For the space between bricks, he aims for joints about 1/16 of an inch thick all around. Refractory mortar can stain bricks, so he tries to be as neat as possible to avoid a lengthy cleanup. To minimize squeeze out, he butters the mortar on only slightly thicker than the joint size he wants, and bevels the edges to keep excess mortar away from the face. As he lays the first row of the back wall, he's careful to maintain the same bond pattern from the hearth. On the side angled walls, he works from the front edge back to help keep the front of the wall in line with the front edge of the hearth. The bricks that butt into the back are pre-cut to a 45-degree angle, and trimmed to fit with a brick hammer before buttering and installation. As each course is laid, he uses a straight edge to make sure all the bricks are level and in plane, and uses the handle of his trowel to tap any stray bricks into position. As he builds up the outer angled walls, he also checks level side to side to ensure the walls are raised evenly and in plane with the back wall. Some of the bricks that butt into the back wall are pretty small. As the walls get higher, they'll get even smaller. Buttering mortar on small bricks can be messy, and a lot of it may get scraped off as he sets the brick, so he butters the gap the brick goes into so the joints aren't starved of mortar. Once he has 2 complete rows, he takes a few minutes to check his joints, cleaning up excess and filling and striking joints as needed so there are no voids. Then he drops plumb lines to keep the front edges of the sidewalls on track and secures them with line pins. Then he turns his attention to a fresh air intake vent that he lays out centered in the back of the firebox, where he cuts bricks to encapsulate the vent so he can continue the same bond pattern seamlessly. For the next several rows, he repeats the process: butter, fit, trim, level, and clean, until he completes the 6th row. Now it's time to begin to arc the back wall inward. The idea is for the back wall to arc inward to meet the back edge of the damper. To do this, bricks are back buttered heavy to the back edge, which raises the back edge. This prevents a whole lot of squeeze out on the face of the joint, which he wants to keep consistent with the rest at 1/16 of an inch. The sidewalls continue to be raised plumb without a pitch, with the angle pieces fitted and trimmed to match the angle of the back wall. For the arc, rather than doing a mathematical equation, Mehaffey does it by eye, arcing in a little at a time and then checking with a level to see how he's doing. He wants to avoid arcing in too much too early, which would result in the arc reaching the depth of the damper prematurely. Instead, he works row by row, inching his way forward. If he has to increase the arc, he'd rather do it in the upper few rows, which will not be visible to the eye. Once he's reached the height, the lintel is set in refractory mortar and aligned flush with the front edge of the firebox opening. Because the lintel will expand and contract at a different rate than brick, a small scrap of foam is inserted to prevent the lintel bricks from bonding with the bricks below. Next, he beds the damper in refractory mortar and lays the final row of brick on the face. Then they continue to fill in around the firebox before giving it a good acid wash.